homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
Well, happy Monday, and thank you for being with me today on Point of View. I'm Liberty McArtor, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and I am always thankful for the opportunity. We have a great show lined up today. I think you will feel blessed and equipped, so stick with us for both hours, and if you miss any part of it, don't forget, you can always follow along at pointofview.net or find the podcast version and listen to it later. But let me give you a little preview for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, it's Election Day. A lot of people will be going to the polls, voting on some important things, gubernatorial races, mayoral races, and discussing all of that with you and more. Tomorrow will be Dr. Merrill Matthews. You'll hear from Kirby Anderson again on Wednesday, doing a remote broadcast. I'll be back on Thursday. We'll have the Next Generation Roundtable hosted by Chelsea, and then Dr. Matthews with you again on Friday, hosting the weekend edition. But one of the things we do on Point of View, in addition to covering all the news topics of the day and the events that are going on around the world, is equip members of the church to live effectively for Christ. And I think the two books we're highlighting today are going to do that very well. And so I have an author and ministry leader with me on the line right now for our first topic of discussion, and that is Pastor Paul Cannings, and he has written the book Leaders in Heels. Pastor Paul, thank you so much for being with us on Point of View today.
Thank you, Liberty, for having us. We appreciate that very much.
So let me introduce you a little bit, and then we'll jump into some questions, because I've read your book, and I think it is so rich in encouragement and advice for women in particular, but really every Christian. So Dr. Paul Cannings is the founder and senior pastor of Living Word Fellowship Church in Houston, Texas. He is also the founder and president of Power Walk Ministries, which is a national and global training resource for clergy and lay leaders. Some other places that he's been affiliated with: Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship Church and Dallas Bible College. He has studied at Oxford University in England, holds degrees from Dallas Theological Seminary, among many other places. And if you're in the Houston area, then you may hear him on the Pastor's Corner, hosted on KHCB. And Dr. Cannings and his wife have 2 adult sons and 7 grandchildren. So again, you can find more information about all of Dr. Cannings' work and ministry. We have those links at pointofview.net. But Dr. Cannings, let's talk about your book, Leaders in Heels. What specifically inspired you to write this book, and what inspired you to write it at this moment in time?
Well, I dealt with the biggest reason why is my mother. My mom is a lady that really loved her children. She passed away at 97, about 10 years ago. And her investment into our lives, it's inspired me to write the book, because I've seen many women struggle with, hey, I have degrees, I'm well educated, I have a lot of things I would like to do with my life, but staying at home, taking care of kids, is that something that is of value? Is that something, how do I, when I'm in the church, take all of what I believe is my gifting and apply that to serving the Lord God while balancing home, while balancing job, and still serving God faithfully? So I've seen women struggle with what kind of leadership capacity I can have within the local church that is biblically based, not based on any ambitions that I may have, but still biblically based, that impacts people's lives in a powerful and productive way. So pastoring over 31 years, I've seen a lot of that. But what inspired the book is that made me reflect on the fact that my mom impacted 8 kids. She had 8 kids. Wow. And of those 8 kids, the impact that she's made has led to Lois Evans, late Dr. Lois Evans, my sister Ruth Ann Cannings, who is serving the Lord all over Europe and in many different ways. My sister Elizabeth, who worked for Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship as the children's director for over 30 years, and now is in Amsterdam working at Tyndale Theological Seminary and assisting the president there as a missionary, and served with Dr. Evans at the Urban Alternative, and the list goes on. My brother has an after-school program, which he's done for almost 30 years with no pay, just ministering to kids and helping them in the after-school program that has led many kids to be able to finish school, not drop out of school. And so when you start looking at the lives that have been touched, because this lady would grab 8 of her kids every morning and teach them the scriptures in the girls' room, in a 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom in Guyana, South America. And that has led to lots of different things happening. My son is the assistant pastor. He's working as an assistant, the dean for the Houston campus for Dallas Theological Seminary. My son is doing other things, Priscilla Shire. There's so many things that have come out from that bedroom that has impacted many lives across the world. And when I think of that, I started thinking of the many women that have sat with me and just said, I believe God wants me to serve him, and here are the different dynamics I'm looking at. Yeah. And when I think of that bedroom with this lady, my mom, there, just teaching her kids and teaching them how to walk in the Lord and to serve the Lord, and teaching us how to serve in the local church, etc., was a great impact. My dad was a great person. He had 8 kids to take care of, and he was an elder at the church. But my mom was that day-to-day person.
Wow. And I loved that. I'm so glad you shared that, because that was something that I thought was so beautiful, is just the honor that you have for your mother, and that is evident. You share those stories and others in the book. And just reading that, was encouraging to me as a mom of young children too. And I think it's your chapter 1, you talk about the transforming power of motherhood, and we can get into this a little bit more after the break that's coming up. But you talk about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and some of the things that she demonstrates that we see in Scripture that can really encourage us today. And I think it's so relevant for moms in general in our current society today, but especially, for Christians too. This seeps in of this pressure to keep up, and especially in a very privileged culture like the one we live in, where people have so much. There can be this pressure to provide all of these material things for your children and to make sure they have this experience and this activity. But it was the faithfulness of your mom, Dr. Cannings, and that biblically based just commitment to the Word of God and passing that on to her children that had such a legacy, not just in life, but in eternity. So when we come back from the break, we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically, but some other biblical figures we'll be discussing through the next hour that are covered in this book. Bathsheba and Abigail, writing about Deborah, a woman of valor, Phoebe, Lydia, unseen heroes in the New Testament, and encouragement for women to, again, follow the calling that God has given us in the local church, in the family, and whatever our giftings are, and to do that in a biblical way that is committed to the Lord. So a lot of great stuff coming up that we will be discussing with Dr. Cannings, and then still more to come after the show as well. And once again, you can go to pointofview.net and click on the links if you're already interested in getting this book, and I would recommend that you do so, or you want to read more about Dr. Cannings and the ministry that he and his family are doing. You can do that at pointofview.net, but stay with us because we'll be right back after this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A recent issue of The Spectator attempted to tackle the difficult questions surrounding artificial intelligence. The opening editorial was appropriately titled, "The Real Threat of AI is Spiritual." It provided some disturbing quotes from 2 Silicon Valley experts. Peter Thiel was asked whether he wanted the human race to endure. After a long, awkward pause, he merely said, "I don't know," and then acknowledged there's so many questions implicit in this. Mark Andreessen imagined a future where people leave the real world and instead spend most of their time online because the online world is or will be immeasurably richer and more fulfilling. The editorial concludes by reminding us that every great human invention brings with it both opportunity and great danger. The same printing press that made the modern world was used to produce the Communist Manifesto. The same railways that sped up journeys facilitated the Holocaust. The same nuclear reaction that Ernest Rutherford discovered would 3 decades later be used to kill up to 225,000 Japanese citizens. This balance is important to remember. Frequently on radio, I've quoted studies and researchers documenting how artificial intelligence is increasing efficiency, reorganizing supply chains, and providing life-changing information. But we should be concerned that people will end up spending more time on computers and expect artificial intelligence to do all the thinking for them. And there is also the nagging concern that a super-intelligent computer won't value human life and decide we are expendable. We need wisdom, and we need to apply biblical perspectives to this new technology. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Cannings has just been telling us the beautiful legacy of his own mother and how that has inspired him to really encourage women in his new book, Leaders and Heels, which we are discussing today. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Dr. Cannings, is, there is so much pressure and I think maybe overcomplication of parenting today, and women can wonder, how am I supposed to be a good mom? But when we look at the example of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the Bible, there are really 3 things that we see highlighted, and you document those in that first chapter. Could you tell us a little bit about what we can learn from her?
One of the things I definitely love about Mary is that, number one, she was a righteous woman that God saw as righteous. And in that culture, where women were, there's a sense of humanity when you come to these things that sometimes is missed when we do the historical look at various texts, not just what the scripture is saying right there, but what's going on behind it historically. When you start looking at the fact that Mary, a young girl, 14 to 16 years of age, is met by the angel and Gabriel, and she's being talked to by him. He says to her, Mary, this is impossible, but God can do the impossible. And Mary accepts that, but that is dramatic from a human perspective. Well, number one, she has to go to a person she's engaged to be married to and tell him something that makes absolutely no sense. Then you never see Mary's parents anywhere engaged in her life. Obviously, Elizabeth is involved, a relative there. But Mary want to know, where's her parents? Where's her parents for this young girl? Because this is embarrassing. This is something that they raised their child. They did everything that was right in their minds for their daughter to be this great woman. And now she's in the middle of this. Now God later on goes, the angel end up talking to Joseph. But Mary has to accept this situation, travel all the way to Elizabeth. And her life is just in a culture that she could be stoned to death. That is traumatic.
Right.
But she endures all of that. And because she believes in God, she believes in what has taken place, she endures all of this, trusted God in all of this, and continued this process. In spite of the fact, it's not like the angel met with Joseph and Mary at the same time and had this wonderful meeting where he totally convinces them that this is taking place. No, fundamentally, the burden of this is placed on a young girl. And she's expected to carry this and function within this in a society that does not accept this anywhere close. Wow. So when you look at that, and then the journey that she has to take on a donkey, could you imagine being pregnant, going along on a donkey? There's not like a whole lot of, different places, rest stops with wonderful restrooms like we have today. Yeah. I don't want to call the name of that particular organization, that particular business, but we have all these different places we could stop, we could do all these things. But her traveling through those circumstances, pregnant on a donkey with no possible places to go to that is very clean and sanitary, while she's carrying a child, which is difficult for a woman's body, she endured all of that because of what the angel said to her. Mm. And when you see her in this journey with Jesus Christ, many times you'll see her say, Mary understood. Mary kept that in her heart. In other words, she treasured in her heart what she's seeing in her son. She even tries to save her son, but by getting his brothers to go get him, and he has to say the word woman in their culture means madam. It's not disrespectful. It's just saying madam, but he said woman. So when you see her trying to save her son, she's still trying to manage this when her husband is gone. Because the average age for a man in that day is 45 years of age. So Joseph is not around. She has boys. She's got the son that people think is crazy, going back to his own hometown. They think he's lost his mind, thinking he's the Messiah. She's enduring all of this. She's walking through all of this. And when she gets to the cross, she's still there as a mother. Mm-hmm. She's still there at the cross as a mother, watching her son crucified. Right. So when you look at her journey, you would think she's done. But Mary, then you go to Acts, you find Mary, she is accepting that he is the Messiah. She's accepting that and being a part of the New Testament church. Her son becomes a leader in Jerusalem's church. Her influence may seem quiet, but it's very powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you highlight all of that, because it's so easy for us who have, been raised in the church or read the Bible for a long time to kind of take these stories for granted and not put ourselves in those people's shoes and say, wow, that required a lot of trust, to trust in God and faithfulness to him, which she demonstrated throughout her life. And that was the most important thing. And then just, again, her faithfulness over her life to continue to serve God as so amazing. But I do want to turn for a moment to Bathsheba. So in chapter 2, you talk about going from pain to promise. So I know we're kind of going back in time here, but I love how you write that Bathsheba's story in particular moved from pain to promise because she didn't allow her past to define her. And that included a lot of injustice and things that were not fair in her past. And so I think that's relatable for anybody today, because it can be hard to continue to serve God when we have been wronged.
Yes, when I sit back, and I must say that sometimes people get a little annoyed when I say it the way I say it, because it doesn't come over very good for a man after God's own heart. But I tell people, I've dealt with ladies that have been abused, ladies that have been felt that they were in love, and they're going to get married, but a baby came, and the husband to be disappeared, no longer around, and sometimes it's happened to them twice, and so now they're this single mom, carrying a home, father promising to be around, never around. I've seen so many different scenarios, especially traveling and interacting with ladies. And when I come to Bathsheba, I purposely pick Bathsheba because her situation is she's obviously a faithful wife. She's there. She's waiting for her husband to come back from war. You don't see her like at a party or something like that. When David saw her, she was at home. Mm-hmm. She was taking care of herself at home. So David violated the structure that God had. He hanging around instead of going to war, showed the level of success he had achieved. And he basically raped her. I mean, when you think of soldiers going, this is the part that irritates some people, but this is the fact. You have soldiers that take care of David going. So David's soldiers are at war. So the ones that are with him have to be soldiers that are warriors. They're protecting the king. And so they have to be warriors, people that have put their life on the line for the king, take whatever orders he gives them. So these are men that have been to war, experienced warriors that are going to her. Her husband is a warrior, Uriah is a warrior. So she notes when they come who they are and the capabilities they have, and that's why she's going. Just no different than a woman having some people approach her with guns and weapons and say, you have to go to this person's house. There's not much difference. There's no permission that is requested of her. Then on top of that, she loses her first child. Okay, her husband is dead. She's mourning that, most likely. She's mourning the loss of her first child in the midst of all of this. And when you see her maturation, I actually just tracked her maturation and did a whole series to help women that are gone through some of the most painful situations, to see that when she keeps her focus and commitment to God, how that so impressed Solomon that he would build a throne and have her sit next to him on the throne. And he would write about it. I do believe that Proverbs 31 is him writing about his mom. And it's just powerful to see how, in spite of all the abuse that she's gone through, you have Nathan going to her saying, hey, they want to put somebody else in place rather than Solomon. Her going to her rapist and basically saying, Lord, as she fights for her son, is incredible. It's incredible how the strength of this woman, the commitment she has to God. Nobody sees her commitment to God. When I think of people talking about Bathsheba, they immediately go to David and what happened. But when you watch her strength and commitment to God, to have a prophet come to her to go speak to David, shows that in spite of what he did, she still had that kind of influence on that person, David.
Yeah.
That it would be better for her to go than a prophet to go. So that tells you the level of respect that she maintained, the level of respect she maintained with her child, because most of the time once this is all done, she's sent off to a house that is built for her with her child and servants that are around her.
Yeah.
If her husband does not request of her anymore, that's her life.
And I really appreciate this, because when we don't acknowledge everything that she went through and the injustice that was done to her, it really undermines how beautiful it was that she continued to serve the Lord in that way. So more with Dr. Cannings when we get back from this break.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
Thanks for being with me. We're still talking with Dr. Paul Cannings, author of the book Leaders in Heels, which you can find at pointofview.net. And we are going through talking about the different women in the Bible that Dr. Cannings has highlighted and really demonstrating their faithfulness to God, what we can learn from them today, and highlighting aspects of their story that are in Scripture, but that we often overlook. And so we were just talking about Bathsheba, and I do want to move on and talk about Deborah. But before we do that, Dr. Cannings, I just appreciate that you highlight the whole arc of her life and really emphasize that, well, when we hear Bathsheba, we think David and Bathsheba, and we think about what happened and then kind of move on in our minds. But she didn't allow her past pain to define her. She continued to be faithful in serving the Lord and also being there for her son. And then she ended up in a place of immense influence that had a positive influence, I think, over her son's life. So any other thoughts on Bathsheba that you'd like to share before we move on, Dr. Cannings?
One of the things I love the most is her willingness to trust God and endure the process. A lot of times when we're faced in a ready-made society with difficulties, we want a ready-made answer. We want it to be quick. We want to resolve it and move forward. But when you track the Bible, it is constantly talking about endurance. And the best way to explain that is to see people that, we may look at the NFL on a Sunday morning or NBA or all these places, different teams, hockey, whatever we may look at. When we think of the history that these players went through, and then we look at the height of their achievements, we say we glory in the height of their achievements, but many times we don't spend time on the journey. And to really have the true meaning of what it's like to play at that level, when it just may be inches that is necessary, just one small, quick move that they learn and went over 100 times. I remember Larry Bird saying, I practice each day. I shoot the basketball 1,000 times most of the time per day.
Wow. But
we look at the fact that we will see that person keep hitting the basket and winning championships, but we don't know their journey. And when you look at their journey, it's endurance. It is going through the injuries, going through the pain of many times people looking past them, like Steph Curry. People thought he was too skinny and couldn't play, and they wouldn't recruit him into college, but he kept playing. So the list goes long, and that's what it comes to the Scriptures. The Bible is telling us the same thing. Jesus Christ endured a lot, but he must be about his Father's business. And when we know in our society, the way Satan has structured the world now, is endurance is irrelevant. Just get the money, just get what you need, just do this or that. But let's not deal with the journey. You don't need a long journey. You just need to go scratch off and hit the lottery and make money. And there's quick fixes to situation. Divorces, get another husband or wife and move on. But we're not into endurance. But what the Scriptures would teach us in James is that endurance leads to completeness, perfection. It leads to growing closer to God. And he only takes people through this process. They bear fruits. So God is more into the journey but we're more into the results. And we're not interested as much in the journey. And the church is pushing the results many times, not the journey. So people are coming to God for quick fixes when God is seeking to get us to deny ourselves, pick up the cross, and follow him. So the whole focus of our walk with God is less of me and more of him. Yeah. And in order to let go of me, I have to come to grips with his journey for me, which means that I'm constantly dying to myself. Like Paul would say, I no longer live. It is Christ that lives in me. Yeah. And that's what makes people get to the point of their maturation that glorifies God and blesses them. It's the journey. Yes. We don't spend enough time on the journey.
Yes, that's so good. And I love that is something that we can learn from so many people, so many examples the Bible gives us, including Bathsheba. And Kind of similarly in a way in terms of focusing on God and trusting Him and taking our steps along the path that He has for us is Deborah. And so obviously she's named among significant judges in the Old Testament. She was also a prophetess. So a very high profile figure, you could say, in terms of our own understanding of the Bible and even in her time. But what I like that you pointed out is that she wasn't seeking acclaim or trying to usurp other people's roles. She also wasn't scared or intimidated by breaking the norms of her day. She was simply focused on obeying God and what He had called her to do. And I think that has so much richness for us today.
It does. It does, Liberty. What I love about Deborah is that once God made it clear what He wanted for her to do, it didn't matter if she's sitting on a horse in the midst of a war and she's no warrior. The fact that God is expecting her to do this and the needs of the people are before her, she placed her own concerns and her own fears most likely to the side because she's a wife. Doesn't say she's a mother, but she's a wife. But yet she faithfully goes to this tree and constantly judges before the people to the point where her level of understanding of the scriptures, because the judging in that day was like you would see with the elders and Boaz. They basically explained what the scripture meant to the issues that the people felt. So she was very, very well knowledgeable in the scriptures in a time when the people and judges, they listened to God when things got really bad for decades, and then they turn around and go right back to what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And the book ends with people doing what was right in their own eyes. And here is this lady, so know the scriptures, so understanding it that she could come to a multiplicity of issues and address it biblically to the level that she gained such respect that God speaks to her, not to Barak. Mm-hmm. I just find that to be amazing in a time in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is not a time where people are obeying God, submitting to Him, walking with Him. They only do that when they became very desperate. So she is dealing with a very dark time, but yet she holds to the scriptures and elevates in God's eyes to be a great woman of God.
Yeah.
And I like the journey. And I guess for me is looking at the journey and not just the results, but the journey. When we learn that journey, it really teaches us how these ladies became great leaders and still functioned wives. She never took over from Barak. She doesn't get a claim in Hebrews chapter 11. She is given to Barak. Don't complain about any of that. She stayed within her role. She faithfully does what she's doing, and she blessed the nation.
Mm. Yeah, and that's something that is kind of a thread, even as you transition to writing about some more women in the New Testament, too. And we've got a couple minutes before the break, but we can come back to this afterward. But we don't like the word servant today, and yet that is something that is so important that we see. And another woman it's exemplified through is Phoebe, who is just dedicated to, again, serving God above all else, no matter where that takes her. So in the couple minutes before the break, introduce us to Phoebe. And that's not somebody that we focus on a whole lot when it comes to women in the Bible.
No, because I did quite a bit of research on Phoebe because, Paul just brings her up in Romans 16. And for somebody to impress Paul, for him to recommend her to the church and let the church know, because he lists the rest of people later on, but he makes a point about Phoebe, and he literally attaches to her name when he says servant, the word deakonos, meaning he's viewed her as having this gift. And most likely people believe she was a lawyer, and she served the people that were poor and disadvantaged and experiencing injustice, and she did it faithfully. And she did it so well that Paul recommends her to this church to give her what freedoms she needs to do the exact same thing for this church, and she faithfully did it. Mm-hmm. You don't see Phoebe trying to gain any notoriety from it. She just faithfully did what God placed in her heart to do, and she did it in such an excellent way. It influenced Paul and how he would speak and promote her.
Yes, such a good example. So when we come back from the break, we'll have a few more people to discuss. Lydia, who was very purposeful and unique in her support of the ministry and other women who served alongside Jesus. So I want to emphasize again, people can find the link to this book at pointofview.net. And there is so much encouragement here. And again, it's encouragement for women in particular, but all people who want to walk faithfully in the path that God has laid out for them. This would be a great small group Bible study, a book for your own edification and your own quiet time. So I encourage you to find the link to Leaders in Heels at pointofview.net. But when we come back, we will discuss more with Dr. Paul Cannings. We'll talk about Lydia. We'll talk about a few more women in the in the New Testament. We've talked about a lot of women that are mentioned in the Old Testament, but we'll talk about some of those New Testament names and what we should take away from this as women who want to serve God and people who want to serve God. So right back after this short break.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Dr. Paul Cannings. We are talking about his book, Leaders in Heels, which highlights so many women mentioned in the Bible and ways that they stepped into their calling and really ended up being leaders in ministry, but by being faithful to God. And so another woman that I want to highlight before our time is up with Dr. Paul Cannings is Lydia. So you write a lot of things about Lydia, but one thing that I thought was good to highlight was her singleness, because The scriptures don't give us a record of her having been married. And obviously, marriage is a wonderful thing, and we encourage that as Christians. We encourage marriage, but sometimes it can be tempting to idolize marriage, or for young people, maybe wait until they find their person and to feel like they can step into full-time ministry. But Lydia gives us a different picture, doesn't she?
She does. And what is powerful about it is that even though Paul was instrumental in starting the church in Thyatira, she played a strong role in the funding of that ministry. And matter of fact, Paul planted the church, but she continued the process forward. Many people believe that she was very instrumental in the church of Thyatira developing, moving forward in a productive manner. And once she heard, now she interacted with the Jews. She was among them selling purple dye, etc., garments, and she was most likely a very productive, wealthy businesswoman. You could see that influence. I mean, you study her. She was a single person that was an entrepreneur that did very well. But even though she was exposed to Judaism, what caught her was Paul's and Timothy's presentation of the gospel. She accepted that. She influenced the entire house. She convinced them to stay in her house. She learning more, most likely from them, became so excited about the gospel. She was instrumental in getting the church going, started and developed, and continuing that process forward. I mean, I know Revelation talks about how the church went a different way, but how it started and was productive, she had a tremendous amount of influence in that process, Lydia.
Yes, and again, like you said, she was successful. She had resources, and that is not mentioned negatively, but something that she gave to God. And it's just, I think, such an encouraging reminder that whatever our resources are, be they skills and giftings and talents or material, when we give them to God, He will use them. But before we wrap up, though, I think this is another of those things that we can take for granted in our modern era. But it was really remarkable that when Jesus rose from the dead, the first person He appeared to was a woman. Can you talk about why that was so significant and remarkable in that time?
I love reading John 20 on that. Mary Magdalene, she came to Christ, had 7 demons. She came to Christ, and her life was Christ, period, done. I mean, you read about her in Luke 8. She's following Him around. She's helped funding His ministry, which means, that there's not like, they probably had 3 changes of clothes, so that meant that she was busy washing clothes for these 12 guys, cleaning them up, making sure they're ready, getting food, finding them a place to stay, along with the other 2 women that was supportive to Jesus' ministry that you see in Luke chapter 8. And that many times is forgotten, We hear about the 12 disciples, but Mary Magdalene was different. She stayed at the tomb. And many times people would say, well, why did Jesus Christ have a problem with her touching Him? And then later on, he would say to Thomas, touch Him. The only reason for that difference is that the whole process of the Levitical law required Jesus Christ to go to heaven and be a wave offering before God. And when God said acceptable, then Thomas could touch Him. But Mary Magdalene stayed at the tomb. She would not leave, and you tend to think that just happened where she got there and she stayed. No, there were women with her. You would see that worked out in Luke, etc. There were women with her. But John wants to emphasize the fact that even though women were with her, Peter and John came later, Mary Magdalene would stay there saying, I must find out where they laid Him. In other words, my job is to go into the tomb, wash Him up, make sure he's clean, because after this, he's going to, she's assuming, she's not thinking about the resurrection. She's mostly thinking about how could I clean Him up and prepare for the final burial. And she's looking for Him in that way. But because she seeks Him so passionately, Jesus Christ allows Himself to appear before her. And she allows her to have interactions with Him, because in spite of Peter and John coming and leaving, in spite of the other women coming, can't find Him, and it's an intimidating situation. I mean, you start thinking of what happened around the crucifixion, earthquakes, saints coming back to life. Yeah. You got soldiers that are warriors at the tomb. It's not like it's a one pleasant walk. It's in the dawn, which means it's somewhat dark, She could have been abused. So she, in spite of all of that, when you look at all of that, it gets you to understand how much she sought him. It didn't matter what she had to overcome. Didn't matter the danger. Didn't matter the soldiers could be there and wave her off. It's all that mattered to her is, where did you put Jesus? And Jesus Christ allows it that, and I believe this now, I can't prove this theologically, that women in their culture was put down so badly because Eve took the fruit to Adam. And for that reason, women were put down quite a bit. Here is Jesus Christ having a woman. He doesn't send her away with the other disciples to share the gospel throughout the world, but he allows this woman to take to the disciples a message of his resurrection. And I believe in that way, Jesus Christ exalted the fact that, yes, you keep blaming women for taking the fruit to Adam, but here I am now, the tree of life, that's the tree of good and evil. She is now picking from the tree of life, who's Jesus Christ. We learn that in Revelation. She's picking from the tree of life, and she's now taking that message to men who have been teaching for 3.5 years, showed them the resurrection by saying, Lazarus, come forth, after they heard the discussion with Martha. And now I've done all of this to educate these guys, and they're not believing, they're scared, they're hiding, but this woman is fearless. And she's taking the message to men who are fearful and well-educated that Jesus rose from the dead.
Wow.
And I just think that is phenomenal when you go from Genesis to this situation of how Jesus Christ elevated women to where, no, I'm not asking her to go into all the world. She's not standing there watching me raise up in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. But I wanted you to know that I made women equal to men. That's what you would find in Genesis. I made them male and female to be fruitful and multiply. If you mistreat your wife, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, your prayers, I will be the obstacle blocking your prayers from being with God hearing your prayers. If you mistreat your wife, Malachi chapter 2, verse 13 to 16, I will affect your offering and not accept your worship. So Paul would put it in Galatians chapter 3, there's no difference between male, female, bond, or free. It's just an issue of function. It's an issue of function and what God wants men and women to do in their function. Women have a baby, but the man doesn't, thank God. but her role is different in the home. It doesn't make her less. It doesn't make her less important.
So
good. Of what God wants to do.
So good, Dr. Cannings. We're about out of time, but there's so much in here that we didn't even cover. So this has been a wonderful conversation, and we appreciate your time so much, Dr. Cannings. And I encourage you listening to go to pointofview.net. Get this book. Again, do it as a Bible study, as a small group. As the editor says right here on the back, the time is now for Christendom to understand and accept the high value the Lord places on women surrendered to him. So this is such an encouraging book, and I'm glad we got to discuss it today. But when we come back, be ready to have your eyes opened and be challenged some more in a good way, because we'll be interviewing Leah Libresco Sargeant, author of the just released book, The Dignity of Dependence, A Feminist Manifesto. You'll want to hear this interview, so stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Thank you, Kirby. I really appreciate your program. You cover a lot of issues that a lot of us think about, I'm sure. And this is the first time I've ever called in, so I appreciate your input, too.
Oh, I thank God for what you're doing on Point of View. You guys have more influence across this country than I believe any of them in terms of tackling the issues and getting the truth out to Americans. It's getting to the point where truth just is bottled up on every hand. Every time you turn around, there's another big bottleneck against truth. I hope your listeners realize what Point of View is doing and supports Point of View in every possible way you can.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
Welcome back to Point of View. We're going into our second hour, and on the line I have Leah Libresco Sargeant, author of The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, if you're listening, to go ahead and you can go to pointofview.net. You can click on the links for today's show and get yourself a copy of this. Leah, I have to tell a little anecdote. Whenever I've been following you on Twitter, I guess X, for a while and try to keep up with your writings. So when I saw that you were going to be writing this book, I was so excited, and I pre-ordered a copy as soon as I was able to. And then I guess I forgot that I pre-ordered it, and I was still so excited, and I would see you post about this book, and I pre-ordered it again because on release day, I got an Amazon package with 2 copies of the book. So I was so excited for it. I pre-ordered it twice, and now having read it, it did live up to the hype. But anyways, thanks so much for joining us on Point of View today.
My pleasure.
So let me introduce you a little bit. Leah is the author of Dignity of Dependence, which we're discussing today, as well as Arriving at Amen and Building the Benedict Option. She works on family policy in Washington, D.C. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere, and she runs the Substack Other Feminisms, a Substack community focused on advocating for women in a world that makes an idol of autonomy. And that's really the theme here. And one of the things you write in your book is that no society can be built on a false anthropology. But we're kind of living in a world that has been built on a false anthropology, aren't we?
That's exactly right. When we start our account of the human person as though what it means to be a human person is to be a lone individual, someone who at their most human, most successful, doesn't depend on others and doesn't have their own life disrupted by other people's needs, we're describing a kind of person who, never exists in total. And really, any of us can only inhabit that ideal for short periods of our lives.
Yes. And really, and this is hard for us, and I know it's hard for me too, and I've kind of accepted this more and, growing in my faith as a Christian, but we, especially in America, we really like independence. We like to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But really, when we pretend that that is who we are as people, or people who that's the status quo and what should be considered normal, certain people in society tend to suffer more from that assumption.
That's right. You can think about this false ideal as something that people have varying degrees of difficulty pretending to be. So no one is a lone individual. No one is entirely independent. But you can ask, well, how long is it till I get caught? Mm-hmm. And all of us are caught at the beginning. Babies are very demonstrably not independent, but we kind of allow it as a rounding error. So you grow up out of childhood, and then how long is it as an adult before you're caught being someone who secretly needs other people? For women, pregnancy means you're likely to be caught out earlier. For men, you can kind of skate along for a while, inhabiting this image of an untouchable, buffered self. But eventually you're going to get caught, and the more time you spend pretending, the harder the drop is going to be.
Yes. And that's something that, there's so many anecdotes and statistics with, people really feeling ashamed of having to ask for help or admitting that they do need others. But before we kind of delve into some of those, I think when people hear the word feminist or feminism, they're thinking of what is probably the more pervasive version of that in our society, which is that basically saying men and women are interchangeable. And this is something, that women in the past maybe had to prove that they deserved to have certain roles. And so they just wanted to prove that they could do it just as well as a man could. But there's actually something anti-woman if we continue to argue that we're just interchangeable. So what do we lose as a society when we erase those differences?
Yeah, I think a lot of strains of feminism have kind of clung to that idea of how do we prove to people that women are equal in dignity to men? And the most neutral way it feels like you can prove that is to show you can swap one for the other and it makes no difference. And there's cases where that's absolutely true, where the person who's cooking a meal can cook either way, but then there's little moments where that breaks down, even in moments that we don't think of as morally charged. So, counter heights in a kitchen are set at a certain height, and they're set relative to men's heights more than women, so that when I roll out dough on the counter, it's less comfortable for my back than my husband. There's lots of moments where full neutrality isn't possible. A female doctor using instruments that are sized for male hands will find that she has to hold them differently than they were designed because they don't accommodate her. And that's where I think admitting that men and women are different makes it easier to treat both men and women justly. Otherwise, you wind up pretending those differences don't exist, and that hurts the person whose differences aren't accommodated in the first place.
Yeah. And that's, I love the chapter, your chapter titles actually are all very clever, but chapter 1 is The World is the Wrong Shape for Women. And you go through some of those examples to things that are, inconvenient, to some things that are based on the male standard, even though it's not a male exclusive environment or, particular, and that it can actually be extremely dangerous and deadly for women. So there's a lot of good information there that I think maybe people hadn't thought of before. But this is also so striking too, because this really ends up affecting so many members of the family. Babies can't survive a culture that despises dependence. A baby who can't be easily accommodated is expected to be aborted. We cannot live a full, flourishing life when our basic biology is treated as a design flaw. So we have a couple minutes before the break, but Leah, this idea that we are interchangeable has really led to a place where women are expected to reject the natural function that their bodies have in bearing children.
That's right. I think we see that as somehow taking away from what it means to be a woman because it interrupts the rest of life. There's this attempt to kind of cordon it off. There's real life, which is the things you take on deliberately, your work, your hobbies, your friendships, and then there's childbearing, which because it comes unbidden, even when you want it, you can't control it. It's kind of runs counter to the idea that everything important in life is chosen, and it's treated as though it's an interruption and possibly an unjust interruption of a human life, as opposed to the way each of us comes into the world, something worthy of honor and thinking about how our whole society should be ordered to make space for pregnancy.
Yeah, so good. As I've been reading this, I just realized that what you've written here, Leah, is really about acknowledging and accepting and, like you said, honoring who we were created to be as human beings. And you have some ideas too and suggestions for how our culture can do a better job of honoring God's design. And so we're about to go to a break, but when we get back, let's dive into some of those details and some of that vision. And I really think this is so important, especially for young people listening today too, when we want to try to articulate a biblical and more well-ordered understanding of reality. We really need to make people realize that what we've been told as women is our rights and our liberation so often actually cause us to deny the beautiful things that make us women. So more on that and a lot of other things in the dignity of dependence when we get back from the short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A
recent issue of The Spectator attempted to tackle the difficult questions surrounding artificial intelligence. The opening editorial was appropriately titled, "The Real Threat of AI is Spiritual." It provided some disturbing quotes from two Silicon Valley experts. Peter Thiel was asked whether he wanted the human race to endure. After a long, awkward pause, he merely said, "I don't know," and then acknowledged there's so many questions implicit in this. Mark Andreessen imagined a future where people leave the real world and instead spend most of their time online because the online world is or will be immeasurably richer and more fulfilling. The editorial concludes by reminding us that every great human invention brings with it both opportunity and great danger. The same printing press that made the modern world was used to produce the Communist Manifesto. The same railways that sped up journeys facilitated the Holocaust. The same nuclear reaction that Ernest Rutherford discovered would 3 decades later be used to kill up to 225,000 Japanese citizens. This balance is important to remember. Frequently on radio, I've quoted studies and researchers documenting how artificial intelligence is increasing efficiency, reorganizing supply chains, and providing life-changing information. But we should be concerned that people will end up spending more time on computers and expect artificial intelligence to do all the thinking for them. And there is also the nagging concern that a super-intelligent computer won't value human life and decide we are expendable. We need wisdom, and we need to apply biblical perspectives to this new technology. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're back with Leah Libresco Sargeant talking about her latest book, The Dignity of Dependence. You can find links to more of Leah's writings and this book at pointofview.net, and it's excellent, so I recommend that you check that out. But Leah, I want to go back and focus on something we kind of touched on a few minutes ago, because it really, I think, is helpful for this entire conversation, but including when we kind of zero in on the issue of, pro-lifers and abortion, to understand our terms. And so for people who advocate for the unborn, seeing their humanity is so obvious to us that it can be puzzling when the other side argues that abortion, restriction to abortion dehumanizes women. And so if we want to understand why they're saying that, then we really need to understand how they are defining what it means to be human. So can you let's circle back and focus on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think part of the struggle in how we define what it means to be human is we often define it according to our capacities rather than our nature. And when you have a construction of being human that depends on your capacities, can you speak for yourself? Can you get yourself around? Can you do various things for yourself? Then everyone's claim to be human is tenuous. A bad car accident, a lingering disease might be enough to push you out of the category of fully human if you lose your voice, your mobility, your cognitive facilities. And we see more and more that it's not only the unborn who are kind of only tenuously connected to the claim of being human. The unborn are grandfathered in, so to speak, based on whether their mother wants them or not. And now increasingly the elderly find that whether or not they're fully human, whether or not they could be viewed as legitimate targets of lethal violence, depends on how much they burden other people.
Yeah.
That the increased prevalence of euthanasia, medical aid in dying, means that at this point, 1 in 20 deaths in Canada comes at a doctor's hands because we view the elderly as not clearly, unambiguously human.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm glad you made that connection too, because I wanted to discuss that as well. What we're really seeing is, as you articulated, the lie about what it means to be a human or what it means to be a person is to be autonomous, and to, that capacity versus nature, as you said. And so, yeah, that's something that struck me. I was reading recently, more about the issue of, medical aid in dying in Canada, and how in so many cases, I believe this was an article in The Atlantic, that, what it came down to, even the doctors being interviewed saying, were you okay with this? Somebody who wasn't even terminally ill, but it's all about autonomy. And it is, well, that was their choice. And, if they've lost autonomy, or that was their autonomous choice. And so that's seen as what it means to be human, as the thing that you strive for. But going back to, women, what's the flip side, though? Because if abortion is seen as the ticket, so to speak, back to autonomy and therefore back to personhood, what happens when a woman chooses to remain pregnant? How does this society see her then?
I think one of the things we see is that this is framed as, well, once it's your choice, then it's only on you. You could have chosen otherwise. So how could we owe something to you if this is fully voluntary, almost a hobby to have this baby? And you see this, unfortunately, even among people who are pro-life when it comes to talking about the baby, but don't sound as pro-life talking about the mother.
Yeah.
I work in public policy, and a lot of my work is, how do we support families who are on the edge, who might be on the cusp of making a decision about abortion? And I get pushback of, how is that baby anyone else's business? Shouldn't she have not had it if she's poor? And, the challenge is, however the baby came to be, the mom is in need now. So how do we respond?
Yeah.
But because she could choose otherwise, it sounds easier for people to say, well, she picked this. It's her fault.
Yeah. I hear that too, so often even in Christian circles, again, like just kind of the way that we have grown accustomed to thinking about other people and our capacity and our responsibility. But we talked about how, our current society tends to define humanity or personhood as having capacity to take care of themselves, having autonomy. But want to know how you, as a Christian, how would you define personhood? And it really goes back to how we were made and what we were made for, doesn't it?
Yes. And this is where I think for Christians in particular, the idea that we're not autonomous shouldn't be a surprise. It might be a surprise to other people, but it can't be a surprise for Christians, because however strong we are, secure we are, however much savings we have to cushion us against the turbulence of the world, we still know that we did not create ourselves, that we rely on God to conserve us in existence and to redeem us. So the idea that we could stand on our own is obviously false from a Christian perspective. It's not a surprise that we depend on God. It shouldn't be a surprise we depend on each other. From a secular point of view, I think it's easier to have the idea that we're very nearly our own authors, since you might start from a purely materialist point of view and not view any need for salvation. But for a Christian, I think there's no excuse in believing that.
Yeah, and even, looking at the calls that we are given to exist in local church community and to be the body of Christ, that all implies that we are very interconnected and not isolated. And yet I think that for many of us, it's easy to, without even realizing it, let society kind of define our understanding of those things. But something that I was wanting to get your take on too, you use the phrase other as a threat to self. So if we again view autonomy and freedom from others' needs as a right, then others' needs do become a threat. And so this section was specifically talking about mothers and their children, but it also kind of reminded me of some of the anti-marriage rhetoric that we have seen among many men on the far right, where you're kind of hearing, this message, or a lot of young men are, that, don't commit, don't tie yourself down, because, basically you need to be able to have the freedom and autonomy, commitment free. Do you see that as a connection as well?
Yeah, I like the way people contrast the capstone versus cornerstone view of marriage, where the capstone is you get your whole life together, you figure out who you are, and then you add marriage on top once you've built a foundation, alone. And the cornerstone view, which is the one I hold to, is that marriage is something you can begin as soon as you find the right person. And in fact, it's easier to build together and have your marriage as the bedrock of everything you're doing together. But I think that view really only works when you believe, yes, marrying someone will limit my options. When I marry someone who works in a particular industry, then we can only live in the places where that industry flourishes. So yes, marriage is a narrowing in many ways, but it's a narrowing for the sake of being able to make a big yes to someone. And the idea of keeping every door open is also a narrowing, because it precludes the option of making a big commitment.
And this is kind of fast forwarding a bit, but you do have a chapter on men specifically. So in a couple minutes before the break, we can maybe introduce this and then dive a little bit deeper when we come back. But it's really the opposite of what men need. That capstone or just no marriage, totally free, autonomous, so to speak, message that a lot of young people are hearing is actually not aligned with what causes us to flourish. And so you really focus on that in your chapter on men, how there is a deep need to be needed and have commitment.
That's right, because the whole book is framed first through the lens of women, because as I said, I think women encounter first and more vividly how badly the ideal of autonomy fails us. But it hurts men too. Men later in life, or because of difficult circumstances, may find that they're in profound need, but often men will be stronger, more independent. But a culture that doesn't value dependence or views it as shameful won't have room for men's distinctive gifts, because then being helped is humiliating. And men wind up with this excess of strength and nowhere to discharge it, nowhere to offer it in love.
Yeah, so insightful. So we're about to go to a break, but we have a lot more to discuss. So make sure that you stay with us. And I just wanted to read this quote. This is something that you wrote, Leah, before we go to our break, that I wanted to quote. This is from Justice Kennedy in the case Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And he wrote, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning of the universe, and of the mystery of human life." And I want to highlight that because, as you highlighted it, it really just encapsulates this lie that we've been discussing over the last several minutes, of the idea that we have a right to freedom from other humans, and that what it means to be human and what it means to be a person is to be completely autonomous, even define our own concept of existence. But that does not line up with the biblical worldview. And we can't create our own meaning or our own definition of existence, but we can flourish when we operate within our design. So we'll discuss more of that when we come back from this break.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
We're back with Leah Sargeant talking about her book, The Dignity of Dependence. So a few minutes ago, we discussed how in our society today, really the functioning definition of what it means to be a human person is autonomy, and that we have a supposed right to freedom from others' needs. And that can cause so many issues as we have been discussing, embarrassment about asking for help, and the expectation that we cut ourselves off from people who depend on us. And so for women, this is very clearly seen with regard to things like pregnancy and the decision whether or not to have an abortion. Because, Leah, as you said, if we see pregnancy and having a dependent as a threat to our own personhood, then abortion is seen as the ticket back to society, so to speak. And then when a woman chooses to go ahead and have her baby, society says, well, that's your fault. So now we're not going to help you because you made that choice, as if it was a choice that we could so easily make, whether or not to have people naturally depend on us. And so this is, there's something similar for men. And we're talking about how you do address men's issues in your book as well. But because of our differences, men can more easily separate themselves. But does that create an expectation that they will?
Yes, I think that's one of the really hard parts. Men are also made both to receive care and to give it. But there is an assumption that, when you have a baby, when your parent is going into hospice, that men are not necessarily going to be touched by that. In pregnancy, it's obvious the moment physically connected to.
Okay, Leah, we're going to have to try to reconnect with you because unfortunately there's a little trouble with your line. But one of the things that Leah highlighted that I'll just talk about for a minute while we're trying to reconnect is that she got some comments while she was writing this chapter titled Men Into the Breach, where young men reached out and talked about how when they weren't connected to a family, then there was really something missing. Because it's one thing to serve in a local community or a local church or even with friends, and many people obviously have a rich life doing those things. But with women, a lot of times we are more naturally and kind of automatically tethered to somebody. There is a built-in need. And as humans, we do have a need to be needed. And so I just thought that message from the quote that she includes from a young man was so insightful because there's a real desire to be needed. And yet, as I was asking Leah and what we were about to talk about, is that because of society prioritizing autonomy above everything else, and men not being as obviously connected to their family, to their dependents, then they are expected to actually cut themselves off. And it's seen as a problem when they want to prioritize family. So anyways, Leah, I think you're back with us, but go ahead and jump back in.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. As always, I'm at the mercy of circumstances outside my control, just like everyone else.
Just like we all are.
More boring ones. Yep. I think one of the challenges for men in particular is that we're made to care for each other. We're made to have other people depend on us and vice versa. But because women have this intense biological claim that forces us to be open to other people's needs, for men, it takes much more of an active choice to step into it. And because, again, it becomes a choice, it can be undervalued or men can be pressured not to say yes to the needs of others.
Yeah. And that is just such the opposite message that we need. And ironically, too, is what men need to choose to step up and to be there. And I think maybe you talk about this a little bit, too, in your book. in other times and other seasons and maybe even in other cultures, that need to step up and step in is more obvious when the stakes are very high, for instance, in war. But when the day-to-day, it can be just as fulfilling and still fulfilling that need to be needed that men have, but it's not as obvious. It's a little bit more mundane than maybe being called up to go and fight to protect your family, isn't it?
That's right. I think we should remember that we're very lucky to live in a time of almost unprecedented safety and prosperity.
Yeah.
So that men relatively rarely expect they have to put their body in between their family and physical danger or intense physical need. And that's a blessing. But it means that women retain the way that we put our bodies directly at the service of the people we love through pregnancy. And that for men, it's finding new channels for that bodily love.
Yeah, so good. So many insights and just things that, we operate according to these realities, but we deny them or just maybe kind of go oblivious. And it is so powerful when we acknowledge this, and really it can allow us to live with more intention. But I do want to go back to something that you talk about in chapter 4 of your book titled The Incredible Shrinking Woman. And again, something that we referenced is that really the waves of feminism that I think most of us think of when we hear the word feminism are often a rejection of our differences and kind of those interchangeable widgets, as you say in the book, of being able to just kind of plug in and operate in a machine without any difference. But there is a very dark side, and I mean, that in itself is wrong, but there's an even darker side too that really can affect young girls in particular. And so you make a connection between the struggle with anorexia that plagues many young women when they start becoming a young woman, going through puberty, but then also trans identification. And that's something that a lot of people probably haven't connected. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think anorexia is a good example of a place where people intended to support girls and wound up inadvertently harming them, and there are parallels for our situation today. When I was in middle school, we'd get talks on anorexia, that were all framed through, some girls who are really high sometimes decide to stop eating. And it makes them feel good for a while because they have this control they lack elsewhere. And the adults were trying to help. Felt like sometimes we're in a pro-anorexia talk. Many girls like you do this. It feels good for them initially. Don't do it, though. It's an attempt at consciousness raising or awareness that can backfire. Anorexia is socially contagious. We know this. America has, unfortunately, helped spread it to other countries by trying to raise awareness. And similarly, this intense discomfort for one's body that many people experience during puberty and just in response to a culture that can victimize girls for their bodies can be steered inadvertently by adults towards the rejection of being a woman at all, rather than the rejection of a body through anorexia, the rejection of womanhood through trans identification. And I don't think these adults are malicious any more than the ones giving the anorexia talk were. There's a thought of, do girls need to hear about this? Will it help to tell them? That it can be a mistake when it causes people to characterize their normal bumpy feelings about puberty as something that can best be solved by fitting into the symptom pool.
Yeah, and that is so important for us to realize. And it kind of recalls your first chapter, The World is the Wrong Shape for Women. And this is something, too, that I thought was so sad. You cite Dr. Sophia Yen, who basically is wanting to market a pill that will completely suppress women's cycles so that they can function the same way that men's can. And what I thought was so sad was this quote you include from her that she wants women to be competitive against people who don't have uteruses. And the reason that is sad is because, as you so well lay out, Leah, is that our society has really made the male norm the norm, and not just the male norm, but the healthy male norm. So anybody who is not male anybody whose bodies naturally, according to God's design, function differently, anybody who is disabled, anybody who is young or old or sick and has more needs, they are not accommodated well because we idolize that autonomy. And so there are so many implications of this in our society, including making young girls feel very insecure and uncomfortable and unwelcome from the very start. And so this is, I think, you see some of those very dark implications in women really just wanting to shrink away, and young women wanting to do that too. And so we're seeing that with so many young women today identifying as transgender. And as you mentioned, there's a social contagion aspect. But one of the quotes you included in the book, too, was how a young woman who had gone through that transition said it was just easier to live when she was not visibly a woman. And that is so sad. And so that's what we need to address as people and as Christians, and you help us do that in your book. So when we come back, we will have more to discuss regarding the dignity of dependence with Leah Sargeant. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Leah Sargeant, author of The Dignity of Dependence. And it is such a good book. If you've missed any part of the interview or you'd like to check out Leah's writings and get the book for yourself, then you can do that at pointofview.net. Also, let me remind you, we had a great conversation with Dr. Paul Cannings on examples of women in leadership in the Bible, his book, Leaders in Heels. That was also a great conversation. So if you missed it, you can go back to pointofview.net and you can listen on the podcast. But Leah, let's talk about, we've discussed the issue here. We've discussed that, women are often not valued and accepted as women, as the way that, our bodies work and that we were created to function in society. And really at the core of that is, as you say, an idolization of autonomy. And that harms not only women, but anybody and everybody. So practically, though, what are some ways that we can address this? I think you discuss some of these ways in your chapter, Illegal to Care, and how so many of our policies treat ordinary life events, as you write, like childbearing and aging as a surprise. Like you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, like, oops, they got caught in needing something. And we act like that is an anomaly rather than just the normal flow of life. So what are some ways that we can really do a better job as a society of accommodating those different seasons of life?
I think one big part of it is, how can these needs be visible in your community? Because that's where things often, get stuck right from the start. For us to be able to answer the needs of our neighbors, we need to know what the needs of our neighbors are. And that's very challenging if your needs stay private. So one thing I tell readers to do is, in the next week, starting now from when you're listening, ask someone for help. Ask them for help with something you could do yourself. So it's clearer you're asking because you think it's okay to ask for help, not just because you're an extremist. And it's many of those moments of trust, of asking someone to pick up your kids, asking for someone to bring you a meal when you're sick, that build up the relationships of love that allow us to make asks in big moments.
I think that is so good and so difficult because I know that even I struggle with, asking for help. And like you said, even if you technically could do it, but again, going back to even a Christian perspective, we're supposed to function in community and together and lean on one another as the body of Christ. And something else that I thought was really profound and important, you write that we need to have an openness to the reality of pain. So just like our culture kind of pretends like we all can define our own existence, even though we really can't flourish when we're not living inside of reality, we tend to think that we can just kind of erase pain or ignore it or hide it away. But how does our relationship with pain and openness to that create actually a healthier society?
I think it leaves us freer to help each other because it doesn't feel like you're letting someone down or revealing a secret when it turns out normal part of being a person. I think often we go the most wrong when we're kind of so frightened of looking needy or acknowledging need that we're only able to interact with each other by apologizing for it or hiding it or making it smaller than it is. You see this even around grief, that people struggle with this sense of, well, how can I help someone who's mourning? Maybe it's by making grief small rather than admitting this is large and difficult. I've run into this myself in the process of having miscarriages where, people who genuinely meant to help me would kind of frame their help through this idea of, well, I'm sure it won't happen again, or the next baby will be fine. That's not a promise they could make me. But it came out of being unsure how to sit with loss.
Yeah, and it does come from a place of good intention. But you're right, we tend to diminish the pain that somebody is often going through because we don't know how to sit with it and how to actually encourage somebody in it. That's so good. But another thing, too, that I think is helpful, especially for women, and, I've got young kids, and so there's a lot of things to juggle. And so this, I really related with this. Sometimes when we are maybe even subconsciously buying into that false definition of personhood or of self, so many seasons of life can feel like a conflict. Like, this is keeping me from my true self. This pregnancy, I can't move as fast as I once moved. Or even this season of parenthood, I'm having to give up something that's really important to me. But I want to be there for my kids. I feel conflicted. So how can we kind of do a better job at defining even ourselves and what the path of life is supposed to look like so that some of those things don't feel like they're wrong?
Well, there's a quote I come back to a lot from Father Richard Newhouse, where he's talking about the question of abortion. He says people say sometimes that the baby in the womb doesn't look like a person, and his response is, that is what a person looks like at this age. It's what you and I looked like. It's what everyone looked like at this age. And I try and come back to that for myself in moments of need or disruption when I have the temptation to say, as I did for a moment 2 years ago when I both was pregnant, nauseated, and then had a staph infection that sent me to the ER. And I heard myself say, I barely existed this November. And then I paused, listening to myself, and went like, of course that's not true. I existed for all of November. This is what existing looked like for me. So I've always come back to that moment of this is what it looks like to be a human person who is sick, who is pregnant, who is small, who is injured. This is still a human life because I, a human, am having it.
Yeah, that's so good. And that life is valuable inherently and doesn't lose its value just because it is in a different state or season than we have falsely considered the norm in society. Leah, this has been a conversation that I've been looking forward to, and I've been looking forward to your book. And I just, again, thank you for sharing your time with us on Point of View. But if you had final words or hopes that people take away from your book here, what would those be?
I think it's that we can live our fullest, most just life when we live our life in connection to the truth. And we live in a society right now that doesn't tell the truth about the human person. Not in the womb, not at the end of life, and not for women throughout their lives. The only way towards justice is by telling the truth.
Yeah, that is so good. Well, Leah, again, thank you so much for being on Point of View today. If you want to follow Leah's work, if you want to get a copy of the book and follow her blog, Other Feminisms, you can find all of those links at pointofview.net. Well, I can't believe that we are already wrapping up today's show. We've had 2 wonderful conversations featuring 2 great books that I, again, highly recommend. But before I let you go, I just wanted to highlight one more quote from Leah's book, The Dignity of Dependence. And she ended it so well, too. And that is something that we care about so much at Point of View, which is truth. She says, when the world starts with a false image of the human person, it is difficult to become re-rooted in truth. Unlearning the world's contempt for weakness isn't a simple intellectual shift. It takes sustained, lived counter-catechesis. So that means we are going to have to be intentional about rerouting ourselves in truth. And this has so many implications for so many issues that I know you care about, whether that is the issue of abortion and advocating for the unborn, the issue of euthanasia for the elderly or the sick, the issue of just caring better for different members of our society in different seasons of life. And so we can articulate that from a biblical perspective of how all human life has value in those different seasons. And I think that's such a beautiful call and beautiful encouragement that Leah gave us. But that is all the time we have for today. Once again, find and share today's interviews at pointofview.net. Tomorrow, Dr. Merrill Matthews will be with you. And I hope that you'll be in prayer for the nation, as many people will be going to the polls on Election Day tomorrow. So a lot of great stuff coming up tomorrow and this week, and you can hear it all at pointofview.net or right here tomorrow on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.